Welcome to Witch Talks, the series for spiritual seekers, witches, and enlightened souls. I'm Hana the Suburban Witch, professional tarot reader, astrologer, and witch, and I hope you're ready to get up close and personal with your favourite witches. In this episode, I'm chatting with a favourite repeat guest, Nicholas Pearson, who joined us on season 2 for an episode titled, Is My Crystal Real? Nicholas has been immersed in all aspects of the mineral kingdom for nearly 30 years. He's an award-winning author of several books, including Crystal Basics, and he offers classes online and in person around the globe. I'm so looking forward to sharing Nicholas's work and wisdom with you today as we chat about crystals for protection. So let's get into it. He's joining us via Zoom all the way from Florida in the United States. Hey, Nicholas, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me back on.
It is an absolute pleasure. I love having my favorite people come back and chat to me, and then it feels like we get to go even deeper on the topics that we had previously sort of done a little bit of a lighter dance on top of, and now we can sort of go a little bit deeper. So firstly, your latest book, which is out now, if anyone would like to snatch it up, is called Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense. So firstly, I wanted to ask why you think psychic protection is important in the first place.
Well, we live in very unprecedented times, as we've all heard, I don't know how many hundreds, thousands of times in the last few years. And there's a kind of miasma attached to these uncertain and unknowable and unusual things that just keep happening. For good or for bad, we are bombarded with stuff every day in ways that like humankind has never been. And it's not just like specific kinds of events, it's all events. We scroll and we see more images in an hour than people used to see in a lifetime, and we have to learn how to filter that out. We've got to come up with effective tools for living in these soft squishy bodies in times that were not designed for them. And I think psychic protection, any kind of magical defense, any kind of energy hygiene practice is so important given the urgency of everything in the world. It doesn't really matter where we fall on a political spectrum or where we live in the world, there is something uncertain and something urgent that touches your life. And this kind of came to a head for me in my local community, as it did for the rest of the world, a few years back. And I'd already planned on this book. And then in 2020, when things got really wild and crazy, um, the book took some detours. It went on hold. I had to learn some new things. I had to understand myself. I had to face my own demons. And then eventually I was able to like get this project together. But we just need it. Like human safety, human security is such a fundamental and universal need. It is something we are all worthy of. And I think a lot of us instinctively or by training take certain steps towards our emotional security, towards our physical safety, but we don't always know what to do energetically, psychically, magically to support us. And I'm sure a lot of occulty and witchy folks listening to the podcast already have a great set of tools in the wheelhouse. But when we start to broaden the scope of awareness of what's incoming, we also need to widen the toolkit. It's got to reach just a little bit deeper and be present in times like this.
I love it. And you're right. This time in the world, it's probably more crucial than ever, just on terms of, as you said, the information that we're getting in, the way everything seems to be going, and astrologically what might be coming up as well. And it's something that I'm really passionate about. I have a class that I offer for free because I was like, I think everyone just needs it, and that's on tarot for protection. And when I'm thinking about what we're going to be talking about in terms of using crystals for this, it also goes into my other passion, which is basically like low energy witchcraft, right? When people we're busy or have chronic illness, disability, parenting, like all of the different things that can just make life really, really hectic, survival mode in any form, having tools that are easily accessible and you don't have to do a full lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram type of ritual in order to feel protected is so important. So I think that's going to be a beautiful blend of those two, the psychic protection and the ease of access I mean, depending, there might be some crystals that are really hard to get onto, but you know what I mean. Some of them might be really, really accessible, and you could wear them, etc., and make it just easier for people. Less barrier to entry in a way.
Yeah, that was actually a really important theme when writing this book. It includes a lot of really common rocks, things like
Mm,
granite and chalk and slate, things that have become staples in my practice because I love a precious gemstone or an exotic mineral species as much as the next crystal lover. But kind of unique among spiritual practices. The kind of set of things that incorporate crystals are so consumer driven that it does
mm,
become a barrier to access. If I say that you must have tantalite, a rare and valuable ore of the mineral tantalum, which is not mined in very many places on Earth, and in some of those places, the way it's mined is not great. Then you might feel some kind of way about being told that you have to get this rare thing, this expensive thing, this thing with questionable ethics. But if I say, hey, if you have access to a piece of granite or a little flint pebble in your own backyard or whatever it might be, then all of a sudden we take the consumerism out and we give you agency to build a relationship with what's already there. We've got, I mean, in the ancient world, yes, the rare and unusual stones were prized, but like how they defined precious was tied into this theme of like the virtues a stone possessed, not in how expensive it was or necessarily where it came from, although those might color people's perceptions of those virtues. So every stone can be an ally for protection. What do we think the first structures were that people sought shelter in? Caves, overhangs,
mm,
and cliff faces. Some of the earliest tools were stone tools, which of course were used for food and building, but also for defense. So the idea of rock as protective is a truly ancient one. And when we can have these really accessible means into this great big giant tradition, like millions of years of hominids working with rocks for protection and defense, then it feels like we tap into something bigger. So we can do a little less effort. That egregore is so big that it kind of does the work for us.
mm. Yes, absolutely. And talking about average rocks, I have one. It sits here on my desk. This is like a special rock to me. I found it in my backyard. I don't even know what it is. I don't even know what type. It just looks like a little stone. It makes up my pathway. We have thousands of them. But this one has a little shape on it, like a little color difference. And if you're watching on the video, you'll be able to see it. And I'm hoping it goes into focus for you. But to me, it looks like the shape of a bat. Like it's got two wings. It almost has like two little ears at the top here and legs hanging down. And where I found this is where I go outside to charge up my moon water on the full moon. Every time I do this, there's this fruit bat. And I've been presuming that I give him a fright when I go out there and start moving around in the middle of the night. And he, all the time, he comes out and I'm standing there holding up this vessel of water under the light of the full moon. And then there's this big fruit bats are big, comes out like right over my head every time. And for the first few times, I was like, oh, poor thing, I gave him a fright and he's flown off. But it has happened every time now. And I'm like, no, I think he's helping me. We are in this together. We're doing this full moon ritual together. And then I find this rock that has the image of like a bat on it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is my bat rock. This is my special bat moon night rock. So that lives right here, nice and special to know that I've got this little ally living in the trees out in the backyard.
It's so sweet. I have a piece of coquina, which is like a limestone made with fragments of shells from my favorite childhood beach, and it sits on my altar. It is my token representative of the earth element, and
Yes.
we'll be there until I'm no longer there.
I love that. And yes, some of these are like I feel like all witches do this, right? I'm looking at my desk. There's so many little trinkets and things that have been picked up along the way that are so special in some way or another. So the next question I have for you around psychic self-defense is what kinds of psychic harm are we trying to prevent with this kind of magic?
Yeah, so I want to preface this by saying that I wholeheartedly believe in the universe as being fundamentally beneficent, that most beings, embodied or not, are doing the best they can with the tools available to them, and that most of us tend toward a fundamentally, we'll say, good nature. I think, good, bad, these get complicated. But you know, my electricity can be really well intentioned, but if I stick my finger in a light socket, it's still harmful. So we don't necessarily, when we talk about psychic harm, I chose that phrase because it avoids connotations of good versus evil.
I love this.
Psychic harm is generated by energies, we'll say, or phenomena that are intrusive. They're in a place they oughtn't to be. When they are disruptive, whether or not they're supposed to be there, they go against the grain or otherwise cause problems. If they stagnate, because the nature of life is the nature of movement, change, and growth. And fundamentally, if we think about those things in terms of psychic harm, then we can go, okay, well, other people's energies can be a source of psychic harm. They can be intentional energies where someone is, proverbially giving us some four-letter word kind of vibes because they
Yep.
don't like us. But also, someone can just be having a bad day. And that might not be in sync with the kind of energies and state of being we're trying to cultivate. It's not personal, but it can still disrupt us, depending on how even keeled we are, how rooted, how strong our own energy field. But there are other kinds of psychic harm that are far more subtle. We can think of our electromagnetic organism in comparison to the Earth's. Our energy field is tiny compared to that of the Earth, and we can end up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Nothing is out to get us, no more so than like we are out to get the insects in our garden. Apart from the pests that might be eating your tomatoes, we don't really take notice of those things. But one misplaced step and things get squashed. And energetically, those currents in the earth can also cause energetic or psychic disruptions when we're not trying to sync up with them, when we're not trying to live in balance with them. And of course, there are all kinds of, we'll say, ooky spooky stuff. Yes, there are people out there throwing curses willy-nilly. Yes, of course, someone is laying down a hex or a jinx to someone somewhere at this time. There are spirits. There are, kind of bigger patterns that we can rub the wrong way. But these are appreciably uncommon. The number one source of psychic harm that everyone, without exception, is subjected to all day long is ourselves, our own thoughts, our own energies, our own ideas, our own commentary on our own actions is is either helping us or harming us. And I think if we all had to write down every single thought we had in a day, which is not actually possible, but theoretically, if you did that and you tallied up all the things that were like really positive things you thought about yourself and the world around you versus all of the things that were not so positive, you might be really surprised.
Mm,
So when we talk about psychic harm, we have to contextualize all of these different sources, the internal, the external, the intentional, the accidental, the circumstantial, and the systemic, and they interact, right? We can be in that situation where the vibes are off and the spirits are roaming, and in addition to that, we can be adding our own harmful commentary. We can be out there to be the good and supportive friend who's doing the right thing for someone and still take their energies home with us at the end of the day if we don't know how to enforce those boundaries. So we kind of have to take a step back and evaluate all of those things as part of a complex web rather than just saying, I'm going to build a shield so no one can send me the evil eye. That's great. No one will send you the evil eye. But what about all those other things, all those other sources?
I absolutely love that. The nuance in the way things can come through to us. Two things. There was one part in your book where you talked about, and I think it's important to touch on because it's something that I've been trying to veer my language towards, and that is this difference in positive and negative energy, and how everyone generally has this connotation that negative energy is bad and positive energy is good. And the way I was taught about this a while ago, and it's like it's in our collective vernacular. We use it all the time, even though I'm like, oh, but if someone's got cancer, I'm not sending them positive energy because we want negative test results, right? Like that's that's one of those points where it's like positive would be bad, negative would be good. And so they're the wrong words to use a lot of the time. And it also goes into that concept of like dark magic or white magic, right? Those are racial connotations with those words and those colors that are, again, they're in lots of books, lots of posts online. People talk that way. We understand what it means, but that doesn't mean it's the right words to be using. And I love words like, blessing and bane and those sorts of things, like baneful magic. I think they give us a lot more nuance around what we're talking about. So I think you mentioning that in the book when you were talking about, psychic harm and what comes through to us was really helpful, and a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, a repressed emotion like joy or happiness is still a repressed emotion and has fallout. If it gets stagnant, it's not helpful. That's no better or worse than a repressed emotion like sadness or grief.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't stop and think about it, but I think like collectively, we are tasked with stuffing our feelings down all the time to make someone else more comfortable or to put someone's needs first, whether that is, for circumstances we've agreed upon, they're our loved ones, our kids, our whoever, or because we're just trying not to take up space. Like there's so much to that. So yeah, this idea of good or bad energy is something I would love to see us leave behind in the last century because energy is neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Energy is not morally or philosophically good. The electricity that's allowing us to speak is not morally superior to the electricity that is used for capital punishment to end someone's life. It is the same force. And then we have to not just think about intention, because that's one thing, but we also have to think about impact.
Mm.
What is the net result of this energy's influence in this time, in this place? And it's that impact part. We see this everywhere in the kind of airy-fairy metaphysical witchy spheres, which overlap. And it's this idea that intention is everything. Well, if that's the case, if intention is everything, I'm already a New York Times bestseller and I don't have to do anything. But I, this is my ninth book. I'm not a New York Times bestseller. Not
Yeah.
as simple as intending it. I can't just intend for my garden to grow a certain vegetable if I never plant the seed. I can't just intend that, my hair gets shorter unless I book the time with someone to cut it. Like
Yeah.
it's just silly stuff. So we have to go away from this good versus evil dichotomy, and we also have to examine intention as secondary to impact, because I
Mm.
I definitely intend to be good with my energy. I definitely intend to be mindful of these things, but the impact is that I can't predict what happens when I send my ripples out into the world.
Yeah.
I have to really focus on what the end result is and not just what I hope it should be.
Yeah. The intention is everything just gives me law of attraction, the secret vibes, which is also in a way toxically positive, right? It is, if you get unwell, that's because you weren't thinking the right thoughts. And I did a whole episode on that because it is something that I see so frequently out there, and I don't think it's helping anybody really. So yes, I think that's a very powerful conversation to bring up, to have, and to have people thinking about as well. So, with crystals, how can we start utilizing them to protect ourselves and our energy field? Are we just putting them on? Are we just wearing them? What are we actually doing with them?
There are so many options. Historically, these so-called precious gems, which are not necessarily the same things we regard as precious today, they could be worn. Historically, people also did some really unsafe things with them, like grinding them up into pastes and eating them, or all kinds of stuff we would never do. But we can take some inspiration from some historical traditions. So wearing or carrying crystals is great. Think of this as like our armor. It becomes an extension of us. It works on us. It's a very personal, localized application of crystal energy. We can also place them in our environment. We have armor we wear throughout the day, but we also get into our fortified home at the end of the night. If you only ever attend to your personal energy, if you wear the suit of armor to bed, but you don't lock the front door, someone's still going to be able to get in. So having the personal and the environmental working hand in hand is really useful. We can use crystals in meditation and grids and layouts to have either localized or environmental effects. We can create elixirs safely, which probably means not putting them directly in your water unless you are absolutely certain of the chemistry. Um, but these are things that we could spray around us, add to the bath, gift to the earth, diffuse in our space. They won't have a scent like an essential oil, which might actually be a strength because nobody knows exactly the magic you're weaving when it
Mm.
doesn't leave a trace like that. And we can also create, we'll say, more complex rituals. So the book has a variety of skill sets highlighted in there, from the really imaginal and visual kinds of things like projecting psychic shields with crystal energy, and the really kind of tactile and kinesthetic things like carrying a particular grouping of stones or wearing specific jewelry. But then, we also get into the ceremonial. How many of us learn some version of a binding or banishing spell that involves cord of some kind? Well, what if you do that to a rock? What about taking something like the kind of rhetorical ritual goals of the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, and we align that with specific gemstone archetypes that help us achieve the same kinds of things? What if we like making, spell bags or charm pouches or whatever our tradition calls them, or incorporating crystals and candles together? So I wanted to ensure that I appealed to a lot of different magical and spiritual skill sets and styles without necessarily being tradition specific. I mean, I can't not have a bias because I'm a human being and I'm filtering everything through my lived experience and my preconceived notions that are informed by that lived experience. But I really did my best to try to eliminate specific deities and specific anythings. So that way you can kind of take the raw potential that the crystals provide and fit that into the mold of your practice. And so therefore
Mm.
you're going to find a wide range of techniques because everyone's practice is going to look different and necessitate different kinds of things.
Yeah, I love the different ways because as you're talking them out, I'm like, I do that, I do this, I do that. One of my favorites is I have found that energetically, one of the places that I really need, like I have standard shields and protections at all times, but one of the places that it's never my baseline is not enough and I need to up it significantly is anytime I enter a hospital. It's like I think it's a mixture of perhaps maybe the fact that there is a lot of electrical, literally electrical in that space, and I think I'm sensitive to electricity energetically. But anyway, so that aspect, the emotions, the energy, there's just so many people. There's a lot of people that do pass away in hospitals. It's like every time I step in, instant headache that turns into a migraine, unless I'm really heavily shielded. And one of my favorite visualizations, especially if it's like a whoops, we have to go in and I'm not prepared, is I imagine that I'm literally wearing like a suit of armor, but it's made from black obsidian. And so
Mm.
everything just like everything's reflected off or it absorbs some of it, but it doesn't come through to me. And that's like my shield as I walk through that environment. And then I come out feeling so much better, stronger, and unaffected than if I didn't hold that visualization in place. And it's not as easy as like, oh, visualize it and then you're good. First few times I tried visualizations like this, way back when, I couldn't really keep them there. Like it took effort and it was exhausting. And now it's become second nature. It becomes easier with time and with practice. Have you found the same, or do you use anything like that yourself?
Yeah, so I love these kinds of psychic shields. I love that imagery of the pseudo armor made of obsidian.
Mm,
That's phenomenal. I use a much simpler kind of imagery involving obsidian and a few other stones as shields in the book, mostly because it's easier to illustrate when it just looks like a bubble.
yep.
Um, totally selfish reasons for, not stressing out my graphic designer, who is my husband. Um, so yeah, there are few kind of like parts and pieces that can fall into place to make this easier, and one of them is repetition. There's no substitute for just doing it over and over again. This means both regularly, meaning at intervals that repeat. So maybe that's daily, maybe that's weekly. I mean, for a personal shield, I hope it's not any less than that. I hope it's more. Um, so a regular interval is useful, but also a frequent interval in the beginning. So, we make the goal of reinforcing the shield periodically throughout the day, not just we're setting it and forgetting it as we go out into the world, but
Mm.
we notice those thin spots, those weak moments, those areas where we're suddenly aware of our energetic or psychic vulnerability again, and we go, oh, that's right, I have a tool for this. And we kind of reinvigorate that shield through visualization or through affirmation. I mean, we don't always have to use images. We're not all wired to be able to do that as well. And that's an important thing that I'm trying to make more space for, that I wish I'd spent more time on in the book as well. Like we can use our words, we can use our other senses to kind of generate these. It doesn't just have to be a picture. If you're not a good visualizer, you can still be very effective at this. And then just being able to reinforce it periodically through the day. I use like a little mudra, like a little like psychic or energetic trigger as well. You can pick
Mm.
anyone that's easy enough to do with a single hand. And then every time you engage it, you're reminding yourself, it becomes a literal tactile reminder of projecting that psychic shield. So when I have to interact with public, I'm usually wearing labradorite. Labradorite is my favorite
I
psychic
love
shield to
that.
use because it's so breathable while still really good at filtering stuff out. And I almost always have some labradorite beads on. They're somewhere under my jumper. But whatever hand it's on, that's probably the hand I'm going to use my little mudra or trigger on. And I'll do it really discreetly. You know, my arms will be crossed. I'll have a hand in a pocket, maybe both hands behind my back as I'm examining someone's rocks or, you know, chatting to them so they can't see. And it's almost never about them. It's rarely ever about the other person and far more about my own energetic needs. Because I really do want to take like this idea of making it personal and making it, you know, full of all these moral and ethical quandaries. For me to show up effectively for someone else, I have to have an effective way to manage my energy. And that's what the shields are about. It's not because someone else's energy is necessarily bad, although it can be disruptive. The the product of being disruptive is harm. It's not that the intention was, but the impact can be. So yeah, I love these kinds of psychic shields. I think we got about 10 of them in the book. I pulled a couple for different reasons. So I don't remember exactly how many we ended with, but that chapter was getting real big. So some had to go.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned as well, so, repetition, but also more like a higher frequency in the beginning. And that's something that I recommend as well to all of my students whenever they take my psychic divination course. In the very, like the basic foundation module one is like, all right, I'm not teaching you anything until we've talked about like protection, cleansing, shielding, meditation, all these, and grounding, these basic psychic hygiene practices, which are just so crucial. Now, with one of the things is especially cleansing, I often say cleanse more than you think you need to at the start. Like cleanse every single day, right? Because everyone's like, oh, you don't need to cleanse that often. No, you don't need to cleanse that often. But if you are at the start, there'll be a day where you forget to do it and you can start to discern and figure out where your sweet spot is. And oh, actually, I didn't feel any difference today. So maybe I can start skipping a day. Oh, actually, if I just do it once a week, that feels pretty good, unless something happens, and then I know I need to do it again, right? So we can figure out our own, I guess, schedule for shielding, for grounding, for cleansing when we do it too much at the start, and then start paring it back, because then you sort of feel that like where we should be, that baseline, and we can start to discern the differences in it. So I love that you also brought up that frequency. And I wanted to also touch on cleansing our crystals. Do you think this is something that needs to or should be done, especially when we're using it for psychic harm or protecting us from?
I mean, I'm a big fan of having a healthy psychic or spiritual hygiene practice overall, which is kind of like threefold. It's our tools, like whatever the tool is that you're engaging with, should probably be free from disruptive forces if you want it to keep you free from disruptive forces. So, yes, cleanse our crystals, but also cleanse your space, because where is that going when you just sweep it off of the crystal? It goes somewhere. And then yourself, because it's like you're making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then you get jelly on you, and you want to go pull something out of the oven. If you don't wash your hands first, now the inside of your oven mitts are going to be grimy and sticky and gross, and every time you put them on, it gets worse.
Oh, I hate
So
that.
yeah, so like all of these parts and pieces have to go together. if we're really good about taking care of ourselves and maintaining the integrity of the like shielding and protective practices, then we probably need a little less environmental cleansing in our home. Unless something happens, we get guests, we have an argument, we get a really bad email, we doom scroll for too many hours out of the day, whatever it is. We all have those ways of letting that kind of
Mm,
psychic influence into our space. And also the tools that are helping to maintain that, they need maintenance. It's not a good energy versus bad energy thing. I've seen the argument that, oh, such and such crystal never needs cleansing and clearing because it doesn't hold on to negative energies. Energies are neutral. The impact of energies is not the same as their intention necessarily, and you can have too much of a good thing. Like all of these themes just circle back around. So absolutely cleanse your crystals, even if you're using something like selenite, which does have a kind of good movement to it that could scrub something from someone else. If you don't in turn cleanse your selenite, it's like using a sponge to wash your dishes. If you don't wash the sponge, your dishes stop getting clean and then everything is filthy. So you got to cleanse your selenite too. You got to make space for it. There is one caveat I will say. Um, if we view the world as inherently unspirited, like I think most people identifying as witches will, um, then we can acknowledge the indwelling intelligence, the indwelling spirit in our stones, in our crystals, and whatever our other tools. And we can certainly trust that they will self regulate. The challenge here is that will they do it in a timeline that's effective for us?
mm,
Think about the life cycle of a piece of granite, of a quartz crystal, of a piece of calcite. These are formed over much longer periods of time, and then they persist for much longer. We take 9 months to grow in utero, and then we continue to grow from there, but we're out in the world experiencing it. Then for most of us, less significantly less than 100 years later, we're gone.
mm,
But that little piece of Larimar that I've got here on my desk, this is who knows how old, and it's going to last for who knows how long. So yes, it'll definitely take care of its own energy, but will it do it on my schedule? Maybe
mm.
not. So cleansing is a way that I respect the indwelling spirit of the crystal because it's doing work on my schedule. So how about I help it out on my schedule too?
Yeah, I had one of my students make a really quite funny comment because I often like to get a bar of selenite, so the like rod, wand, whatever you want to call it, and sort of sweep it over my aura. And they were like, it's like a lint roller. I was like, oh my gosh, now I've got that image in my head that I'm lint rolling my aura, which I think
Oh
is
yeah.
really funny. What if you could step into a world where magic isn't just real, but it's taught by those who've walked the path before you? Welcome to Witch School, a revolutionary 2-day gathering in Melbourne where ancient wisdom meets modern feminism. If you're tired of scrolling through endless social media posts searching for authentic spiritual guidance, join us on June 7th and 8th at the Hawthorne Arts Centre, which transforms into a haven of practical magic. You can choose from over 30 classes taught by experienced witches who understand that true power comes from community, not exclusion. Browse the magical marketplace, connect with your future coven, and learn everything from tarot reading to potion crafting. Created for every witch who's ever felt the call of her own power. As one of our sisters shared, I've finally learned to trust my intuition and practice without fear, awakening parts of myself that were suppressed for years. Are you ready to claim your birthright? Visit witchschool.au and use code HANA, HANA, for 15% off your ticket. Witch School 2025, where every seeker finds her coven. So, what are your favorite ways to cleanse your crystals? What's your go-to?
So my favorite ways are things that do not harm the stones and for the most part are effective for any crystal and hopefully lots of them at the same time. So if I'm working one-on-one with a crystal, say this Hanga Shungite, I love using breath for cleansing because it's such a personal thing and you can really bring a lot of energetic focus to the breath as well and kind of sweep things clear that way. The challenge with that is I do the cleansing breath or breaths with this stone, and then I got to pick up the next one and do that and the next one. And if I had to do that one by one for every crystal in my home, about the time I did the the very last one sometime next year or the year after, the ones I started with would now be 2 years past due. So we also need methods that are safe for and effective for, larger collections, hordes maybe of stones. And I really love smoke and sound.
Mm,
Um, I have a background in music. Sound is a thing that's just really visceral to me, and it doesn't have to be beautiful and polished and perfect sound. Like you don't need the expensive singing bowl or, shaman blessed drum. If you got them, great. But like the oldest percussion instrument in the world, right here, it's our hands. You can clap with great intention and cleanse crystals. You can sing, you can chant, you can tone, which can be guttural or anything else. You could do recorded sounds. I respond less well to them than I do live sound. Maybe that's a me thing. There's no peer-reviewed journal that has tested the efficacy of one versus the other. Um, but sound is phenomenal. And then
mm,
we've also got smoke. So many traditions around the world use smoke cleansing. You can work with plants that grow in your area. You can work with allies you grow in your garden. You can go visit your witchy shop and pick your favorite cleansing herbs or incense or other things as conscientiously as you are able to or want to, and find the right tool for that. So I do a lot of smoke cleansing in the house, and it's great because it's not just the crystals that are benefiting when I do smoke or sound, it's the whole space.
yeah.
And since I'm occupying that space, I can spend a little bit of extra time and cleanse me too. And then all three of those parts that we want to focus on with our spiritual hygiene, our tools, our environment, and ourselves, they're getting cleansed in one fell swoop.
Yes, I love that. Sound is one that I often gravitate towards because it's useful to do everything at once. And I imagine it as like the sound waves are like shaking off the debris. Like we've seen when, someone has a really heavy bass somewhere and how it bounces and it moves. I imagine that's kind of what happening, like sand bouncing on a thing bouncing off. So one of the things I use is I've got a little bell, right? A little bell. It's clear. I love the tone, but I generally don't do the house myself. I give this to my 4 year old. I say, "Can you go wake up the house, sweetheart?" And oh my gosh, it's his favorite thing to do. Goes into every room going, "Wake up, wake up," and dinging this little bell everywhere. And it's just beautiful. And I think that's almost like such a happy, gorgeous energy to sort of bring in when we're doing that sort of sound cleansing as well. The other thing, I found this when I was in Oxford last year, this new, I guess, sound cleansing technique called tincture. Have you heard of those? Oh my goodness. This was one of those moments where I was with my good friend Brandy. We were like, oh, what's this? We picked it up and they clanged together and we just both went, oh, I have to have that. Like, there is no doubt in my mind this is the best thing I will purchase. And it is so wonderful. They've just got the most, they look like they're Tibetan, small, tiny Tibetan gongs on a little leather cord, and you sort of ting them together. We called them ting tings before we knew they were called tincture. And it's just the clearest, most beautiful tone. So that's my new favorite that I use when I have to, intentionally cleanse because of an event and I don't want to bring my toddler in to do that kind of level. I love those ones. Those are glorious. But yeah, crystal sound bowls can be great, all those sorts of things, or singing bowls, I guess people call them as well.
Yeah, they're all phenomenal. And at the end of the day, use what you have access to, use what is appropriate for your space. Like if you work an office job in corporate America, pulling out the drum or lighting some Palo Santo in the middle of your cubicle is probably not a good idea. So we can use the power of breath and
Mm.
visualization and so many other things that are subtle,
Mm.
and equally as effective.
I used to have a room spray, as I say with quotation marks, in when I worked. I used to work in a display home, and in like the little sales office at the front there. And I would be like, I'm just gonna, spritz some room spray around to make it smell really nice in here. But it was it was a cleansing spray. So I was like, do, 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 do. No one will know. And then I felt great because we'd have so many people in and out of that place. So that was something I was doing that was socially acceptable, but also energetically nice. So, one question I want to ask is if you had to pick, and I know this is going to be like the hardest question that I ask you, if you had to pick 3 to 5 of your favorite crystals for psychic protection, which ones would they be?
I'm going to make it easy on myself by starting with something I've already mentioned, which is labradorite.
Mm-hmm.
So, labradorite is this beautiful member of the feldspar group that gets that beautiful flash, which we call labradorescence appropriately enough, because it's made out of these really thin twinned layers that laminate together. We call them laminae. And as light passes through, different wavelengths of light are essentially like sorted out by the varying thicknesses. So some are going to scramble only blue light or gold light or orange or green or whatever towards us. So it creates that beautiful diffraction pattern. We see no two labradorites are alike, but sunlight selectively moves through. So it creates this kind of energetic sheath when we invoke it for protection that allows some things to go without being
Mm.
filtered and some things get stopped at the door. So it it creates a shield that's appropriately breathable. Some stuff is gonna never get remotely close to you, and some is gonna get to you, but it has to be qualified by that light. Labradorite also kind of cranks up the amplitude, the strength of our own signal. It's great for repairing the aura after experiencing psychic attack or other forms of psychic harm. It's got this ability to help kind of magnetize our willpower and really focus on our magical intentions. So people use it for manifestation and magic and spellcraft and like a wide variety of settings, but it's a great one. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about a crowd pleaser for protection, which is black tourmaline. I've got a little piece here on my
Mm-hmm.
desk. Black tourmaline, I don't generally think of as strongly shielding per se. It's not about building a wall nothing can get through, but it is really good for moderating energy in a different way. So this is the most iron-rich member of the tourmaline group.
I was going to say, it
Uh,
feels like a very grounding crystal to me, more so than shield.
Yeah. And it is that grounding quality kind of induced by its extra iron and its
Mm.
crystal structure that gives us a really unique phenomenon. So it is a cyclosilicate. It forms as a ring of silica with other stuff attached within and around it. And these kind of stack circle on circle on circle in its crystal structure. And it's almost like a pipeline, a channel, a conduit.
Mm.
What black tourmaline does for us is it helps reestablish a meaningful connection between our comparatively small energy field and that of the earth. And it's like having your very small sink plugged into a much larger sewer system. But it does one more thing. It acts like an energetic garbage disposal. So as stuff
Mm.
goes through, it gets neutralized and broken down. So that way, as it flows away from us, the earth can recycle and transmute and do so many other wonderful things. So, yes, we can use it to shield against unwanted influences, but it is more effective at giving them a safe outlet.
I love that.
So, so we just don't hold on to them.
I
Um,
keep tourmaline at my entrance to my door, and I've got selenite there as well. So it's kind of like this double aspect of when people come in, it's like just get rid of anything that we don't want in the house, I guess.
Selenite's another great one. Since you brought it up, let's talk about that. I think
Mm-hmm.
selenite and tourmaline are so wonderful together because we get the really stabilizing influence from tourmaline, but there is an inherent softness and brightness in the energy of selenite, which also lives on my desk. I've got one of these little pillars.
Yeah.
Um, and what we see in these is a really fun optical phenomenon. So these are made out of all these little parallel fibers of gypsum
Mm.
crystals. We call this
Because
variety
it's I was going to say it's satin spar gypsum, isn't it?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
I've got a little like selenite disc,
Mhm.
like a little plate basically, and that's what I'll, if I'm sitting here and I think my bracelet needs to be cleansed, I'll just pop it on top of that, and that's kind of like my little jewelry cleansing station.
Yeah, absolutely. So that fibrous structure that's in there literally moves light. If you have a piece of it and you put it
Mm.
on a light base or shine a flashlight through one end, it travels all the way to the other. So it gets things in motion. And
Mm.
a lot of protection work isn't necessarily about keeping things only out. It's also about making sure that systems are naturally healthy enough to take care of themselves. So something like selenite is kind of like the fountain in the retention pond. If we don't put the fountain in, all the runoff gets in there and it gets really grimy and green and gross. It becomes a hypoxic environment. We get fish kills and all sorts of other things. Flesh-eating bacteria will grow in it. But if we don't take any of those contaminants out, I mean, ideally we would, but we can't always. But if we just add movement, there's no stagnation, there's no chance for that cultural eutrophication, that process of
Mm,
getting grimy and mucky to take place. And selenite is a really good reminder that it's not always about what you keep out, it's what you keep around.
mm,
Um, as a as a stone that so many people equate with light, the levity, the brilliance of it also kind of helps dissolve energies that aren't useful. So that way they become less stagnant, less rigid, and can be swept away. If we couple that with a really strong grounding stone like black tourmaline, we've got our bases covered so well.
yeah, I love that. What's another one that you love?
Mm. You know, this is one of my like unsung heroes in the
Hmm.
protection world. So few people like even take notice of it. It's a metamorphic rock. Officially, the chief mineral in it is called ferroenstatite, but we usually know the rock as bronzite. Um, so it's a very inexpensive tumbled stone. It doesn't cost very much. If you get a really nice piece, it's kind of flashy, but not the depth of flash you see in an opal or labradorite.
Mm,
It's not quite chatoyant the way tiger's eye is, but this is a stone for keeping us calm under pressure. It has undergone extreme metamorphosis. It started out as some completely unrelated looking rock, and by being heated and squeezed by the movement of rock in the Earth's crust, it reorganizes itself into this new stone. And so when we experience pressures of life, it helps us embrace a certain amount of softness. We don't get through things always by being rigid. There's a place to stand your ground, but also a little vulnerability goes a long way to adapting,
mm,
to bending like the willow branches instead of snapping off.
yes.
And we get some of that magic, but it has another quality that I love. And it does this with quite a bit of grace. It's a wonderful return to sender stone.
Mm,
It's not the, proverbial mirror that everything bounces back off of, which can cause problems because it's hard to control that. Instead, it's more like when you're sitting down at the restaurant and the server brings out the wrong item from the kitchen. You don't send it back because you hate ham or you've never eaten a Caesar salad in your life and therefore it's bad. You send it back because it just isn't what you ordered. So when
mm.
energy is showing up on your doorstep that you didn't order, this is an opportunity to say, hey, you know what? Actually, this can go back where it came from because it doesn't belong here. And it does that in a way that does not escalate the situation. And so
Such a key proponent doesn't escalate. Absolutely. And what does it look like? So you said bronzite. I don't know if I've seen it or if I'm just presuming that I've seen it. I know of one crystal that's kind of got little goldish kind of glints to it. Is that the one?
it's the one.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I feel so proud of myself. I did
It
not embarrass myself in front of you.
Yeah, it and a lot of the average pieces look quite unremarkable until you find the right angle and really good lighting. But sometimes it's those unremarkable rocks that have some pretty potent effects.
Yeah, no, I love that. All right, so that's three. Do you have any others? No, that's four. What'd you say? Labradorite,
Yeah.
selenite, bronzite, black tourmaline.
Mhm.
One more in your top five.
All right. So I'm gonna pick one I don't think I've publicly talked about very much in all
Mm-hmm.
of this. And let's talk about, oh, there's so many options. There's 145 in the book, so I'm trying to pick only one. Let's do barite. I
Mm-hmm.
really love barite, and I think it's another one of those stones that like mineral collectors enjoy, but crystal healers and crystal witchy folks maybe spend a little bit less time getting to know.
You're
Barite is great.
right.
Yeah,
What color is that? Is that green?
yeah, a lot of colors. A lot of the really popular stuff that's out on the market right now is this beautiful kind of blade-shaped variety that's like a sky blue.
Mm.
It's out of Morocco. You can have gold and brown and green and colorless and I mean just a whole bunch of options. Barite gets its name because of its barium content, and that in
Mm-hmm.
turn gets its name from the Greek word baros or barios, meaning heavy. it is so dense, and yet it has a really high refractive index. So it is both dense in material and filled with light. So it's like an upper and a downer in one. It's expansive, it's contractive. It's a, I'm a walking oxymoron in some ways.
Is it one of those ones that you pick up, like someone goes, here, hold this, you're like, whoa, I didn't expect it to be that heavy? Is it one like
Yes.
that?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Like way heavier than hematite, for example. Like a
Mm.
piece of the same size as hematite is going to be significantly heavier.
I love
But
hematite.
yeah, its heaviness relates to its ability to ground.
Mm.
Um, it is great for sealing the aura against psychic attack without necessarily sealing off all the things we do want to come. It also helps to lessen the chance of things like blowback and crossfire when we are doing things like banishing and binding spells. So like sometimes you do have to send something back. Like it is the thing that will be the most effective.
Mm.
Not my first choice, but it is still sometimes the thing that makes the most amount of sense. When we work with barite, it helps to kind of insulate the people that could experience fallout, so they don't fall victim to that.
Mm.
I think it's also a really good one when we want to become more independent and assertive, because there's a kind of emotional component to protection as well. It's having the confidence to say, "Hey, you know what? Being in this room feels terrible. I'm giving myself permission to leave this room." So Barrett works on that side of it too.
Yeah, I think as well with that emotional component, that sometimes ties into when we can do ourselves harm unintentionally. And that can be things like fear. Fear can make us vulnerable to this kind of psychic harm as well. So I'm always, at least with with my kids as well, trying to give them tools and things they can lean on to help alleviate that fear and ground them away from that fear, so that it doesn't take hold and doesn't come in and do them more harm than good. There is healthy fear out there for certain situations, but then there's times when its imagination's going wild or that's kind of thing as well. So I think that's great. That might be a good one for them as well. Do you have like do you just need a small piece of that one because it is so hefty?
You know, I think you could get by with like if it's hard to find tumbled, but if you could, a little tumbled stone would be great in the
Mm.
pocket. You can find fairly inexpensive, at least in the US, but fairly inexpensive, like single crystals or raw chunks, or I love the little clusters, because it takes on a few different crystal forms. We often see them as like little blades or rosettes. You
Mm.
can also find them like here, for example, is like a desert rose made out
Mm-hmm.
of barite instead of selenite. So it's much sturdier and much heavier, but it's full of that sand, giving it that kind of brown color.
It looks like a
But
brain.
yeah, a little bit, yeah. But it has it grants a sense of like ballast. It doesn't make the external influence go away, but it helps us, find that center stillness so we don't get knocked down by it. So
Mm.
you don't necessarily need a big piece. I have a couple of really big chunks that I love, but start with what you can find.
Yeah, I don't think it's one that I've actually seen, but I also haven't been looking for it. So that'll be one I'll keep my eye out for. One other thing with your book, which I love, is most crystal books on the market are of the, I guess, lighter variety a lot of the time in terms of, you know, not always love and light, but usually around that. These are healing crystals. These are ones that are going to help and do all of these things. And yet, your book covers topics like curses, bindings, haunting, all of those sorts of things. So, what was it that made you drawn to like talking about those? Typically more, I guess, more witchy or more paranormal topics, I guess, as well, especially with the haunting. What was it that made you go, yes, crystals for this, crystals for a haunting? Like, how would you use a crystal and like if you think your house is haunted, right?
Yeah, so, big picture, part of it was um, there are some really wonderful crystal books on protection. Judy Hall's written, I mean, it's really one book that's gone through many revisions and expansions over the time, but they feel like very different books by the end of the day. And then my friend Ethan Lazzarini has a fantastic book on crystals for protection as well. And they're really good, serviceable books. And they're also just a couple of blind spots we don't see a lot of in the crystal community at large, and is talking about exactly these things. So I wanted to see if I could one, differentiate my work from others by having a topic that others didn't have. And it also meant that I didn't have to spend as much time on topics that were super well covered by
Mm.
the likes of people like Judy and Ethan, who are phenomenal. Um, and the other part of it is like when you're in the kind of witchy occultist sphere for long enough, you encounter a little bit of everything and sometimes a whole lot of certain things. And admittedly, without any qualifications except maybe an aptitude for trying, I've been invited to help in some pretty strange circumstances. And crystals have always been my go-to. Like it's the first line of defense for a lot of things. So I have used them in those kind of paranormal settings. I have used them for like trapping servitor spirits. I've used them for bindings and banishings and the like. And historically, we also see that crystals are not all love and light. Believe it or not, our beloved selenite, associated with angels and celestial light, there are dozens of examples of curse tablets from the island of Cyprus made out of selenite. And
Mm.
that's, not an association people would immediately make with this stone that's, soft and gentle.
Well, I
And
mean, you just mentioned angels, right? If anyone is familiar with what a biblically accurate angel is like, they are not
terrifying.
they're not the new age concept of an angel. They're pretty badass.
Right. And so are crystals. Like the idea of using, we'll say, minerals and mineral resources in baneful magic is not new. It's quite the opposite of new, in fact. So the kind of icing on the cake that helped me decide to keep some of this stuff in the book, because there's a couple exercises in particular that I really wasn't sure were going to make it through all the rounds of editing, not because my publisher was going to have a problem, but because I was really concerned with public perception.
Mm.
There is this idea of what crystals should be or ought to be, and also I don't want to isolate any of my former readers who are uncomfortable with practices like that, but I really don't want people to get blindsided.
Yeah.
It is super unlikely that our listeners are going to experience being the target of a curse just because someone who has the skill set to do it effectively and the know-how to perform it accurately is probably not willing to incur all the other stuff that goes with that. But there are also these kind of big system-wide things that are like global curses we all bear.
Mm.
The challenge of consumerism, the patriarchy, the cis heteronormative patriarchy, misogyny, racism. Like we're all going to be touched by some of these things. And if we have bigger tools, if we have heavier hitting tools, then we can be prepared for instances like this.
Mm.
And my sincere hope is nobody reading this book needs to expel a spirit or perform a binding of someone's power, or dare I say use the crystal curse. But if they need to, I wanted them to have some sensible advice that didn't require things that were going to break the bank. And through ingenuity on my end or tradition or some marriage of the two, I knew was going to work.
Mm.
So that's why those things are in there. Because although I believe the universe is fundamentally good, although that's a complicated thing to say, um, bad things happen to people. And
Mm.
that's not that's not a moral pronouncement necessarily on the kind of person they are. Sometimes stuff just happens.
Yeah.
And when it happens, I want people to have more tools available to them.
Yeah. And I will say, I was excited when I saw this section in there. So for me, I was like, hell yes, I want more of this kind of stuff. I am a witch, so maybe I'm drawn to that kind of stuff a little bit more. But then I've also got clients that come to me because of really intense stuff, right? Usually people seek me out when shit hits the fan. So when someone seeks me out because there is, an entity or a literal haunting in their house or something like that, then it's great to have more tools. I think it's great. So I think practitioners, people who work in things like paranormal investigations, all of that, I think it's such a useful, practical thing that they can then lean on, especially if it's something that you're wearing or taking with you. Like it's another tool in that toolbox. And witches out there, everyone listening, they might be drawn to doing things like ghost tours. I know I am. So they can use it when they're in those sorts of spaces as well. Or, like I said earlier, going to something like a hospital, going to a graveyard, going to Christmas dinner with the family, whatever it is that you need extra protection for.
Yes, absolutely.
So, which techniques do you use more often for yourself?
I'm a really big proponent of the easy things that
Yeah.
we can also kind of stack together. So that means there's a handful of shields that I mean, the labradorite one I've already cited is one that is like an everyday practice unless I'm in unusual circumstances or unless I just know that it's time to mix things up. I also grid the home, so we've got things like selenite and tourmaline at regular intervals around our space, but there's also some more intentional crystals around different kinds of thresholds, like windows and front doors, or the office, because this is also a liminal space where
Mm-hmm.
I connect with the outside world. And some of the other kind of ritual techniques that are in the book, I try to weave into my practice throughout the cycle of the year. Not always as we'll say rhythmically spaced as ought to be, but I think a really good piece of advice is to change things up from time to time. If someone is trying to follow you home from work and you always take the same route home, they know where to find you and when. But if you do things different, they can't predict that. When someone breaks into your home, you don't just lock the same lock. You install a deadbolt. You get an alarm. Maybe you adopt a really big dog. Like there's things that we do, and when we have more than one option available to us, we can choose how much of it we want to engage at a time. So have the easy kind of set it and forget it environmental stuff with your grids or other amulets and things that you might incorporate crystals into. Do the personal stuff, but then explore, have a little bit of fun. It's really so much more exciting when you give yourself permission to have fun with it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love that. One thing I get asked about a lot is people who are going through things like nightmares. So, do you have a specific crystal that you would recommend if someone was dealing with nightmares?
There's a few that historically are associated with this, and like again, being a fan of simplicity, I would my first line of defense if someone can find it is a hagstone or a
Mm-hmm.
hold stone. They feature really prominently in an upcoming project that I've got, and they're also mentioned in the book here. I've got instructions for making a hagstone charm, and they're in the directory of 145 stones. But I think another one that we could do, if we want, like a proper crystal or gem, could be something as simple as jade. Jade has been
Mm.
associated with restful sleep, with pleasant dreams, with dreamtime journeys. And nephrite jade in particular, its structure with a little bit of imagination, the kind of woven fibers, the interlocking twisted amphibole minerals that it's made out of kind of resemble the felted structure of the collagen, the connective tissues that hold our bodies together and give it its strength and resilience. So jade gives us this kind of psychic resilience, energetic resilience from the inside out, which is so nice and can be great during a time when we are vulnerable. We're
Mm.
unconscious. We don't have a lot of say in it. So we get the kind of folkloric connection to pleasant dreams and sleep, and then we also get that kind of energetic defense that it offers too.
I love that you mentioned that like collagen aspect because it is something that is used in so many beauty routines, like a jade roller or a jade gua sha. And, you know, that's so fascinating when you hear that the makeup of the stone itself is associated with what we're trying to do with it.
Yeah, yeah.
So fascinating. I love that. I generally have like a lepidolite pillar next to my bed at all times. That's just like my absolute go-to. It just feels like it's holding me in an ocean of calm. But yeah, there's different ones with my kids if they ever have nightmares. It's like, all right, go pick from mummy's stash. You pick whatever crystal feels right to you. And they're usually picking things like the sardonyx or the tiger's eye or like red jasper. Like they're always sort of going for these like really grounding crystals. So, and I think that's just intuitive on their behalf. And I think it's beautiful because they're not the typically pretty ones that most kids will be drawn to, but they really, really do help just sort of like ground that energy and almost siphon it off in a little way, which I love.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for sharing all of your wisdom today. Is there anything we haven't chatted about that you've got in the book that you're like, I just want everyone to know about this one thing?
I think we covered a lot of main points. I think if there were any anything else that I wanted to just mention, even folks who know and love my works, there are going to be things in here you have not learned about, at least through my works, and some things that maybe have never appeared in print. Even like my little pocket encyclopedia with 450 stones, 20% of the crystals in this new book are not in any of my other books. That was like a personal challenge I gave myself just to make sure, one, I get to do cool new things. I don't want to talk about the same 450 stones time in and time out. So there are new things in here, some of which are informed
Amazing.
by travels I've taken or experiences I had, and some were just kind of like, hey, so and so recommended a cool new rock to me for this situation. Let's go see how I feel about it. So you will find some new things, and some will be very common, humble stones. Some will be very unusual, and I tried to have like the whole spectrum between.
I love that because that's so exciting as well. You want the accessibility, but for people who really love crystals, having something that is shiny, new, and unusual can be so exciting at the same time. So it's great to have that balance. And I'm very impressed. You've got a 450 encyclopedia, and there's 20% of this current one that is not even in there. So that sounds very impressive. Well done on meeting that goal.
Thank you. Thank you.
So if people want to find your book, find you, follow you along, take any of your classes, where should they be going?
Thank you so much for that. The like one-stop shop for all of this, you can visit my website, theluminouspearl.com. It's got my calendar of events. You can read about all of my books. It'll link out to the various places that you can get them. Of course, if you want to purchase any of my books, go check out your local independent bookseller, metaphysical shop, witchy bookstore. If they don't carry it, I bet they'd be happy to order it for you. Most indie booksellers really want to get you what you want. And yeah, just I hope the tools help the people who need them the most.
I'm absolutely certain they will. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for sharing your wisdom and your work with us. It's really, really wonderful, and we're all very appreciative. Everyone, definitely go check out his website, classes, all of that are fantastic. And hopefully, on another upcoming season, we can have you back to talk about more.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for listening today, and we'll chat with you next time. Have you been searching for a safe space to connect with other witches and grow and develop and learn together? The Suburban Witches Society will bring you knowledge and friendships that are spiritually aligned, plus a whole heap of fun. You will get access to our private community Facebook group and group chat, which that chat pops off. There are monthly group calls, you get a reading with me, you can do Q&A, and we all just chat and hang out together. It's like a slumber party. You are welcome to wear your pajamas. This is not like fancy influencer witches on a Zoom call. We are very real over here. You can take a peek at behind the scenes episodes of the podcast that are uncut, and you get access to them before anybody else. There's a resources section where you get PDF downloads, you get access to classes that are not available to the public. Here is what one of our members, Brandy, has to say about her experience in the Suburban Witches Society. Signing up to the society has been the best present to myself. My witchy knowledge has exploded, and I've forged some of the deepest friendships in this group. So come and join Brandy and everyone else in the Suburban Witches Society, meet your new witchy best friend, and get a little bit closer access to yours truly as well. I hope to see you there.